if you're elected, what are you going to do to clean house?
Well, law enforcement comes down to accountability. That's always been the strength of my message. From the top to the bottom, there has to be levels of accountability. If the person in charge does not set the tone for the expectations of the mission and how you're going to carry out your duties, then you can't expect those at the lower ranks to do that. So who you surround yourself with at the top level, they have to be like-minded, they have to be qualified, and they have to be committed to holding each level below them to the same standards. So for me, it's about changing a culture. It's about defining that law enforcement represents what is greatest about our society. Not that we're better than anyone, but we represent what's greatest about our society, and that you not only reach, but you exceed your potential as it relates to serving the community and upholding the laws of the state. We have to have people who are qualified and have the skill set to investigate internal cases that might be offenses that are criminal or violations of the policies within the organization, or externally the cases that were never investigated, like El Mirage or other places we heard of. We can't allow for that. We can't allow for those that are empowered, the public officials, to break the law and not be held accountable and not be punished for those violations. So some of those may be things that are internal that require some form of discipline. Others might be criminal nature, where you have to go and work with the prosecutors, officers, attorney generals and say, listen, we believe that these are violations of law, and no different than our community, our law enforcement professionals need to be held accountable to the same standards. So I will commit to that, and I will bring the right people in to do it.
What's your position on 1070? Were you against it, or are you for it? What's your position on it?
Personally, I look at a lot within 1070 and I say, as a person in the community, a lot of those things are similar to what the federal government already had in place, but there were extreme things that were within it that were unacceptable. We can't have something in there that mandates that a law enforcement officer has to choose executing on an illegal immigrant violation over a robbery that's up the street. Okay, the thought that you can't leave this to go protect someone whose life is in danger because you could be held civilly liable and sued, that can't be written so strictly into law that it handcuffs law enforcement's ability to use their discretion on what the priorities should be. So those aspects of it, I felt undermined law enforcement's abilities. Other elements of it were just consistent with federal law and empowered law enforcement to do their job, but the abuse of those rules and those laws is really what caused the challenges. We know that the federal government gave 287G to law enforcement so that you could target those organizations that were violating crimes in our community that were illegally here. The abuse of that law is what caused us to lose those rights. So it's really how you apply those laws and you do it in a fashion that's objective and professional that allows you to continue to use the tools. When you abuse them, you lose them. So immigration is a challenge in our community. Law enforcement will always have to play a part in that because the violation of the law, but the relationship you have with the DOJ and the other agencies that carry out those laws as their priority, we have to hold them accountable and make sure that we're facilitating their needs.
What's your opinion of the incident involving Marty Atencio? How do you remedy that situation so those things are not happening again?
I see those situations no different than what we talked about with the concerns of the deputies out in the field. It's cultural and it's unacceptable. No one should die in the custody of any law enforcement organization because of neglect, abuse, or inhumane treatment. Detention centers are not intended to be a luxury palace. It should be an uncomfortable environment, but the detention itself is the uncomfortable part of it. It shouldn't be mistreatment or abuse or neglect. And when we have people who have mental disorders of some sort or are handicapped, we have a responsibility to give them the things that they need to keep them safe. And the detention officers need to understand their role, that it's objective, it's not subjective, that any abuse of force is not acceptable, and that there will be ramifications for those abuses. On the outside, the taxpayers need to realize that every dollar that is spent on a lawsuit, either defending it or paying it out because we haven't done our job properly, undermines our ability to keep you safe.
There have been a lot of problems with Tent City as well, and violence and deaths, etc., associated with it. Would you keep it? Would you try to reform it? What would you do?
The fact that it's a tent really isn't the factor that should be the highest level of consideration. Now, if I had the opportunity to build a better, safer structure to incarcerate inmates, and it didn't come at the cost of taxpayers, that would be my #1 choice. But if I had no choice, we would just make sure that it is run humanely, safely. We're not paying lawsuits because of abuses in there, and that it is something that regardless of who is detained there or why, their time served will be exactly what it should be, time served.
I wonder if the $100 million that was misspent under Arpaio's regime from the Jail Enhancement Fund could have gone to build something like that.
It absolutely could have. And then you look at the $50 million in lawsuits, those are lost dollars. Those were not productive dollars. What could we have done to enhance safety in our community with those dollars? The community needs to recognize that if you feel like the current sheriff is doing a good job, you're in a bad relationship and don't realize it. Law enforcement can be done so much better, more efficiently, more effectively in keeping us safer with less of the sideshow, less of the wasted dollars, and less of the abuses, because we should never have abuses.
There have been troubling reports recently of posse members with criminal backgrounds and misusing the badges they're given, etc. So would you keep the posse?
If you want to be a person who's wearing a uniform, carrying a badge, or in some cases carrying a gun, and empowered by the sheriff's office, there better be a high level of standards that you meet before you're given that authority. So I think it's a great tool, especially coming from Silent Witness, on how it can be utilized to educate the community, to be an active member and going out and passing information when we have certain crime problems, in many other ways in education, in the schools and other places. But they should be facilitators of success. They should not be ones that are empowered above their qualifications to carry out law enforcement duties or to have the authority of going out and displaying a badge that could be confused with a legitimate deputy's badge. So I think that it needs to be restructured. I think that there needs to be more in-depth backgrounds, and I think it needs to be something that has higher level of accountability. But I do believe it is a great tool, and there are a lot of good people in there that are serving the community as volunteers, which is, you know, one of the greatest gifts you can give back.
Let's address the one use of the posse that Arpaio put it to recently as cold case posse regarding the this laughable investigation into Obama's birth certificate. How do you address this use of the posse, and what do you think of his explanation that no taxpayer money was used, therefore it's okay?
I think the whole investigation was contradictory and hypocritical. There were hidden dollars, first and foremost, because any time it was allocated by any sworn officer to train someone to be engaged in an investigation or otherwise has dollars attached to it. And every resource has value. Just because you have a volunteer doesn't mean that you should waste that resource in a manner that is not serving the best needs of our community to keep us safe. And you can't tell me that you felt that this investigation was so important because of the allegations, even though it had been covered many times before, that you would commit posse members because they came at a free price, but you couldn't see that the seriousness of the allegations rose to a level that is, you know, of the highest level. You're talking about allegations against the President of the United States. So if you feel that serious about it, then you should assign sworn deputies to investigate it. But the reason that you chose not to was because you knew that that wasn't the truth. So you thought that you would have an excuse by saying, well, I didn't spend any taxpayer dollars on it to look into it. No, every investigation where there's criminal implications, people who are certified, qualified, and have the empowerment to do their jobs are the ones that should be responsible for it. So to say that it didn't come at dollars wasn't true. To say that it was, you know, you chose the cold case posse because they were qualified, but you didn't want to waste any resources, it's contradictory to really what the outcome should have been, which is a very serious allegation, but it had already been covered many times before. So it was political in nature. We all know that, and let's be honest with ourselves.